Sometimes the greatest debt in a person's life is owed to someone whose name they never even knew. Wherever you are watching this story from around the world, whether your morning has just begun or the night has finally grown quiet, I hope you will stay with me until the very end, because this is not simply a story about money. It is a story about dignity, sacrifice, and a promise that remained hidden for years. On a cool autumn evening in downtown Chicago, the annual Carter Health Foundation Charity Gala had just come to an end. Camera flashes followed every step Evelyn Carter took as she left the grand ballroom. Reporters called her name from every direction. Investors hoped for one more conversation. Politicians waited patiently for another photograph. At 39 years old, Evelyn had built one of the largest health foundations in America, yet the louder the applause became, the quieter she felt inside. She smiled politely, thanked everyone for coming, then slipped away through a side entrance before anyone noticed. She asked her driver to take the long way home, but halfway there, she quietly changed her mind. "Pull over," she said. "I think I would rather walk for a while." The driver looked surprised, but nodded. A few minutes later, Evelyn found herself standing outside a small neighborhood diner that had probably served the same families for decades. Warm light spilled through the windows. Laughter drifted onto the sidewalk. It felt nothing like the marble halls she had just left behind. Inside, every table was occupied except for a single empty chair beside a little girl with bright, curious eyes and a tall black father whose calm expression somehow made the busy room feel peaceful. He wore a clean denim jacket that had clearly been repaired more than once. His hands carried tiny marks from years of woodworking. Across from him sat a little girl carefully arranging fries into neat little rows before taking one bite at a time. The father smiled without saying a word, allowing her imagination to turn an ordinary dinner into an adventure. Evelyn hesitated for a second. No one in the restaurant seemed to recognize her, and for the first time in years, she liked that feeling. She walked toward the only available seat and gently asked, "Can I sit with you?" The father looked up, meeting her eyes with quiet kindness instead of surprise. "Of course," he answered. "There is always room for one more at our table." "Thank you," Evelyn replied as she sat down. The little girl smiled brightly. "My name is Lily," she said. "This is my dad, Marcus. I am Evelyn." Lily tilted her head. "You look tired." Marcus gave an apologetic smile. Children usually notice things adults pretend not to see. Evelyn laughed softly, a genuine laugh she had almost forgotten she still possessed. For a few precious moments, no one spoke about billion-dollar investments, board meetings, or headlines. They talked about homemade pancakes, school science projects, and the best place in Chicago to watch the leaves change colors. It felt strangely familiar, almost as if she had stepped into a memory she could not quite reach. Before their meals arrived, Marcus quietly excused himself to help an elderly customer who had dropped a walking cane near the entrance. He returned without expecting thanks, simply picking up the conversation exactly where it had paused. Evelyn watched him carefully. There was something about this ordinary father that felt impossible to explain, and somewhere deep inside her heart, a forgotten thread from many years ago had begun to pull ever so gently. Marcus returned to his seat, as though helping a stranger had been the most ordinary thing in the world. He never mentioned it again, and that simple choice caught Evelyn's attention far more than any speech she had heard inside the grand ballroom earlier that evening. Most people wanted to be noticed for their kindness. Marcus seemed happiest when no one noticed at all. Their meals arrived on plain white plates. Lily thanked the waitress before touching a single bite, then smiled at her father. "Dad says every meal is somebody else's hard work before it becomes our blessing." The elderly waitress paused for a moment, touched by the little girl's words, before quietly walking away with tears gathering in her eyes. Evelyn lowered her fork. "You taught her that?" Marcus nodded. "Children remember what we repeat every day. I try to repeat gratitude more than worry." Lily giggled. "He also says pancakes taste better when nobody is in a hurry." Evelyn laughed again, surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. She had spent years surrounded by executives who measured every sentence for advantage. At this small table, no one seemed interested in impressing anyone. Marcus asked nothing about her career, her wealth, or the expensive evening gown she still wore beneath her light coat. He simply treated her like another person sharing dinner after a long day. For reasons she could not explain, that felt almost unfamiliar. Lily leaned forward with the fearless curiosity only a child possessed. Miss Evelyn, what do you do every day? Evelyn smiled gently. I help run a foundation that gives people opportunities to build healthier lives. Lily thought carefully before asking another question. Does helping people make you happy? The question lingered in the air. Evelyn searched for an answer that sounded honest. Sometimes, she admitted. Sometimes it only reminds me of the people I could not help. Marcus quietly nodded as if he understood without needing any explanation. None of us can change every life, he said. But we can always change the next moment standing right in front of us. Evelyn found herself studying his face. There was no trace of pride in his voice, only calm certainty shaped by experience. She wondered what hardships had taught him to speak that way. Outside, cool wind brushed fallen leaves across the sidewalk. Inside, the little diner remained warm with conversations, clinking dishes, and the comforting scent of fresh coffee. It felt like a different world from the one Evelyn usually occupied. Across the room, a young mother realized she had forgotten her wallet. Before she could finish apologizing to the cashier, Marcus quietly stood, walked to the register, and paid the bill without saying who had done it. He returned before the family even noticed. Evelyn watched the cashier glance toward Marcus with grateful eyes, but Marcus simply resumed cutting Lily's grilled cheese sandwich into neat squares. You do that often? Evelyn asked softly. Marcus shrugged. Only when I can. Do they ever thank you? Sometimes. Sometimes they never know. Either way, the meal still reaches the table. Those words settled deep inside Evelyn's heart. They sounded strangely familiar, like the echo of a lesson she had once learned long ago, but somehow forgotten. As dinner continued, Lily reached into her backpack searching for colored pencils. Instead, a neatly folded envelope slipped onto the table. Marcus gently picked it up before Evelyn could read the handwriting on the front. He tucked it back into the backpack with almost instinctive care, but not before Evelyn caught a brief glimpse of elegant blue ink that stirred an unexplainable memory, one she could almost recognize, yet could not quite place. When dinner was over, Marcus reached for the check without hesitation, but the waitress smiled and quietly told him it had already been taken care of. Marcus turned toward Evelyn with a grateful expression. That was thoughtful, but you did not have to do that. Evelyn smiled gently. Maybe not, but I wanted to. Marcus nodded. Then thank you. I will make sure the kindness keeps moving. Those simple words lingered in Evelyn's mind as they stepped outside into the cool Chicago evening. The city lights reflected across the sidewalks while Lily skipped ahead, carefully avoiding the cracks between the concrete squares as though it were the most important game in the world. Marcus never rushed her. He simply matched her pace, carrying her small backpack over one shoulder while listening to every story she wanted to tell. Evelyn realized she had attended board meetings that felt less meaningful than this quiet walk down an ordinary street. As they reached the corner, Lily noticed a newspaper box with a handwritten sign taped to the side. A local elementary school was collecting winter coats for children whose families could not afford them. Lily looked up at her father. Do you think my blue coat still fits someone smaller than me? Marcus smiled. I think it could keep another little girl warm this winter. Lily answered without hesitation. Then let us bring it tomorrow. Evelyn watched the exchange in silence. There had been no lecture, no speech about generosity, only a conversation that made kindness feel as natural as breathing. A few blocks later, they passed a small grocery store where an elderly man struggled to carry 2 heavy bags toward a nearby bus stop. Before Evelyn could even notice what Marcus intended to do, he had already walked over, lifted the heavier bag, and accompanied the man to the bench without introducing himself. He wished him a pleasant evening and quietly returned to Lily, who continued talking about an upcoming science project as though moments like these happened every day. Evelyn found herself asking, does she always see you helping people? Marcus looked toward his daughter before answering. Children learn far more from what we practice than from what we preach. I hope one day she remembers the small things instead of my words. His answer settled deeply inside Evelyn's heart. During her years of leading one of the nation's largest charitable foundations, she had celebrated donations worth millions of dollars, yet she had rarely witnessed compassion carried with such complete humility. As they approached Marcus's old pickup truck, Lily opened her backpack to look for a notebook she wanted to show her father. The same neatly folded envelope slipped onto the pavement. Before Marcus could pick it up, a light breeze unfolded one corner, just enough for Evelyn to glimpse elegant blue handwriting across aged cream paper. The words were visible for only a heartbeat, but they struck something buried deep within her memory. The closing sentence read, "Please allow this gift to remain anonymous, because hope grows best when it expects nothing in return." Marcus calmly folded the letter and placed it back inside the backpack with the same quiet care as before. Evelyn said nothing, yet her pulse quickened. She had seen those exact words somewhere many years ago, not once, but over and over again, in letters that had changed the direction of her entire life. She could not remember where, and she certainly could not imagine why an ordinary black single father would be carrying a letter written in that unmistakable style. But as Marcus wished her good night and Lily waved enthusiastically from the passenger seat, Evelyn stood beneath the streetlights feeling as though an invisible door to the past had begun to open just a fraction. Sleep refused to come that night. Evelyn sat alone in the library of her penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline, while the city slowly settled into silence below. The elegant blue handwriting she had seen for only a brief second continued to replay in her mind with remarkable clarity. She had seen those words before. She was certain of it. After several minutes of searching through old memories, she walked toward a locked cabinet that held documents she had never found the strength to throw away. Inside rested a worn leather box containing letters from nearly 20 years earlier, each one carefully folded and tied together with a faded navy ribbon. Her fingers trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the first page. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained beautiful and unmistakable. At the bottom of every letter appeared the same sentence that had quietly shaped her entire future. "Please allow this gift to remain anonymous, because hope grows best when it expects nothing in return." Evelyn closed her eyes. She was 20 years old again, exhausted from working 2 part-time jobs while trying to remain in nursing school after losing both parents within 18 months. Tuition bills had piled higher every semester until she finally accepted that her dream was ending. Then, without warning, the first anonymous payment had appeared. There had been no speech, no ceremony, no photograph, only a handwritten letter encouraging her to continue studying because the world would always need people who chose compassion over comfort. Every year, another letter arrived. Every year, another tuition payment quietly appeared. Every year, she searched for the mysterious donor, and every year, she found nothing. When she finally graduated, she promised herself that if success ever found her, she would spend the rest of her life creating opportunities for others. That promise eventually became the Carter Health Foundation. Yet, despite every investigator, accountant, and attorney she had hired over the years, the identity of the anonymous donor remained hidden. Evelyn carefully compared the old letter with the words she remembered seeing on Marcus's folded envelope. The wording was identical. Even the elegant curves of certain letters seemed impossibly familiar. She immediately questioned her own judgment. Surely thousands of people could write similar sentences. Surely one ordinary evening at a neighborhood diner could not possibly be connected to the greatest mystery of her life. The next morning, however, the thought refused to leave her. During the weekly executive meeting, Nathan Brooks reviewed scholarship budgets while Grace Miller presented reports on the Foundation's newest education initiatives. Normally, Evelyn listened with complete attention, but today she found herself staring absent-mindedly at one of the original anonymous letters resting inside a folder beneath the conference table. Grace noticed her distraction. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently after the meeting ended. Evelyn hesitated before answering. "Do you remember the anonymous donor who paid for my education?" Grace smiled. "The mystery that no one has ever solved?" "Of course. You once said that finding that person would be the greatest thank you of your life." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Last night, I met someone who reminded me of those letters." Grace looked curious but said nothing more. Across the conference room, Nathan announced that the Foundation's annual anniversary celebration would take place in just 2 weeks, and that several long-forgotten historical records would finally be digitized for the public archives. Evelyn barely heard the rest of his announcement because one quiet thought had already taken root in her heart. If the past truly intended to reveal itself after all these years, perhaps it had begun not inside a boardroom or a vault of forgotten documents, but at a small diner where an ordinary black single father had simply made room for one more person at his table. The following afternoon, Evelyn canceled 2 investor meetings for the first time in years and drove herself across the city instead. She found Marcus's woodworking studio tucked between a family-owned bakery and a small bicycle repair shop. There was no polished sign, no expensive showroom, only the warm scent of fresh cedar drifting through the open door. Inside, handcrafted shelves, children's toy boxes, rocking chairs, and sturdy dining tables stood neatly arranged, each carrying the quiet character of something built to last instead of something built to impress. Marcus looked up from a workbench, smiled with genuine surprise, and set aside a piece of carefully sanded oak. "I was not expecting another visitor," he said. Evelyn returned the smile. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all. Lily is still at school, so it is just me and the sawdust today." As Marcus prepared fresh coffee, Evelyn wandered through the workshop. Every piece displayed remarkable attention to detail, yet none carried a luxury price tag. She noticed a handwritten note hanging near the register that read, "If a family cannot afford a child's bookshelf, please ask before walking away." There was no explanation beneath it. Marcus followed her gaze and shrugged with quiet embarrassment. Books deserve a home, even when money is tight. Evelyn gently traced the smooth edge of a small wooden rocking horse. "Do many people ask?" Marcus smiled softly. "Almost none. Pride is expensive. Sometimes I simply lower the price before they have to." Once again, he spoke as though generosity required no recognition. Their conversation drifted naturally from woodworking to childhood memories, from favorite books to the importance of keeping promises. Marcus never asked about the foundation or the gala. Instead, he listened with patient attention whenever Evelyn spoke, making her feel heard in a way that years of public success rarely allowed. As they talked, the front door opened, and an elderly pastor stepped inside, carrying a damaged wooden cross from a neighborhood church. "Marcus, I know you are busy," the pastor said, "but we cannot afford a replacement." Marcus examined the cracked wood carefully before smiling. "Leave it with me. I will repair it this weekend. At least let me pay something." Marcus gently shook his head. The children who gather there every Sunday have already paid enough by believing that place is their second home. The pastor thanked him warmly and quietly departed. Evelyn watched the exchange without saying a word. Every hour she spent with Marcus revealed another act of kindness hidden beneath ordinary moments. Nothing about him suggested a man seeking admiration. Everything about him suggested someone protecting a deeply personal promise. Late that afternoon, Lily burst through the door after school carrying a colorful folder. "Dad, guess what? Our class is writing letters about heroes." She happily spread several drawings across the workbench before pulling a familiar cream-colored envelope from her backpack. "I almost forgot. Grandma said you should never leave this at home because it matters." Marcus immediately reached for the envelope with unusual care. His calm expression changed for only a heartbeat before returning to its familiar warmth. Evelyn noticed the subtle shift. It was the first time she had seen him look genuinely protective of anything. Lily tilted her head innocently. "Dad keeps old letters because he says promises should never be thrown away." Marcus smiled at his daughter before placing the envelope inside a locked wooden drawer beneath the workbench. He changed the subject so naturally that Lily never questioned it, but Evelyn could not ignore what she had just witnessed. That evening, as she drove back through downtown Chicago, she made a quiet decision she had postponed for nearly 2 decades. She called Grace Miller and asked her to retrieve every archived scholarship record connected to the anonymous donations that had funded her education. She wanted payment histories, handwritten correspondence, courier logs, and every surviving document, no matter how insignificant it appeared. Grace heard something different in Evelyn's voice and asked only one question. "Do you think we are finally close?" Evelyn looked ahead at the fading sunset and answered with complete honesty. "I do not know if we are close to finding a name, but I know I have finally met someone whose kindness feels exactly like the handwriting that changed my life." Grace Miller arrived at the Foundation archives before sunrise the next morning, carrying a notebook, a laptop, and a determination she had not felt in years. The basement storage room held thousands of carefully preserved records dating back decades, each box labeled by year and program. She expected another routine historical review. Instead, She quickly discovered that every scholarship connected to Evelyn's education had one unusual characteristic. The tuition payments had never come from a charitable organization, a corporation, or a family trust. Every payment had been routed through different community banks, purchased with certified checks, and accompanied by handwritten letters that all ended with the same unforgettable sentence. Whoever had planned the donations had taken extraordinary care to remain invisible. Grace spent hours comparing signatures, envelopes, postal marks, and archive correspondence. The financial trail ended again and again in perfectly ordinary places that revealed nothing about the person behind the gifts. By late afternoon, only one small detail continued to stand out. Every letter had been written on the same rare cream stationery manufactured by a family-owned paper company in Wisconsin nearly 20 years earlier. Curious, Grace called the company. The elderly owner searched old records and quietly explained that the stationery had been discontinued many years ago, but one customer had purchased several large boxes because he believed handwritten letters mattered more than printed messages. Unfortunately, the purchase had been made through a neighborhood retailer in Chicago, leaving no individual name behind. Grace thanked him and leaned back in her chair, realizing the mystery had become even more personal than she imagined. Across town, Marcus closed his workshop early so he could attend Lily's elementary school art exhibition. The school gymnasium was filled with proud families admiring colorful paintings, handmade sculptures, and cheerful self-portraits. Lily excitedly pulled her father toward a drawing she had titled "The Strongest Person I Know." It showed Marcus holding one hand while carrying a toolbox in the other. Above them, she had carefully written in large, uneven letters, "My dad fixes wood, but he really fixes hearts." Marcus smiled with quiet emotion before kneeling beside her. "That is a beautiful picture." Lily looked up with complete sincerity. "Because it is true." Nearby, Evelyn had arrived after making a private donation to the school's science program without announcing her visit. She wandered through the exhibition until she unexpectedly saw Marcus and Lily standing beneath the drawing. She remained several steps away, unwilling to interrupt the simple happiness they shared. Watching them together reminded her that true wealth could never be measured only by numbers. As families slowly began leaving, Lily proudly handed her father another folded letter from school thanking volunteers who had helped renovate the library months earlier. Marcus accepted it with the same gentle respect he gave every handwritten note before placing it inside the familiar wooden portfolio he always carried. Evelyn noticed that careful habit once again. He preserved words of gratitude as though they were priceless treasures. Later that evening, Grace arrived at Evelyn's office carrying a stack of copied documents. "I did not find a name," she admitted, "but I found something stranger." She placed 2 pages side by side on the desk. One was an original scholarship letter from 20 years ago. The other was a recent thank you note written by Marcus to a local community center after they hosted a reading program for children. Grace had obtained it from a public newsletter that recognized volunteers. "Look at the handwriting," she whispered. Evelyn studied every curve, every space, every graceful stroke. The similarities were impossible to ignore. It was not enough to prove anything, but it was enough to make her heart race. Grace looked at Evelyn with quiet concern. "If Marcus really is connected to those anonymous gifts, there is one question I cannot answer." Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes from the letters. Why would someone spend years changing lives and work so hard to make certain no one ever discovered his name? 2 days later, the Carter Health Foundation prepared for its annual anniversary celebration, an event that brought together educators, community leaders, scholarship recipients, and volunteers whose quiet efforts had changed thousands of lives. Nathan Brooks reviewed the final program with visible satisfaction. Near the end of the evening, he planned to unveil a new historical exhibit honoring the unknown individuals whose generosity had shaped the foundation during its earliest years. Grace listened in thoughtful silence. Every document she had examined seemed to point toward Marcus, yet no piece of evidence could answer the question that mattered most. If Marcus truly was the anonymous donor, why had he protected that secret for so many years? Across town, Lily rushed into the woodworking studio carrying a colorful invitation she had received from school. One of her paintings had been selected for a children's art display inside the foundation's anniversary celebration. "Dad, they want my picture to be there with all the other students," she said, her excitement filling the workshop. Marcus smiled with genuine pride. Then we should celebrate your hard work, not mine. Lily hugged him tightly. Will you come with me? There is nowhere else I would rather be. He never imagined that accepting his daughter's invitation would quietly place him at the center of a story he had spent decades trying to avoid. On the evening of the celebration, the foundation headquarters glowed with warm lights as families, donors, teachers, and students filled the grand hall. Instead of wearing an expensive suit, Marcus arrived in a neatly pressed navy jacket that had served him through weddings, church services, and every important occasion since Lily was a toddler. Lily proudly carried her framed painting while greeting every volunteer she recognized with the same cheerful kindness she had learned from her father. Evelyn noticed them almost immediately from across the room. She excused herself from several business conversations and simply watched Marcus encouraging Lily as she carefully adjusted the frame on the display wall. There was no trace of nervousness or ambition in him. He behaved exactly as he had. Inside the neighborhood diner, giving his full attention to the people standing beside him rather than to the elegant surroundings. Grace quietly approached Evelyn. I spoke with 3 former scholarship coordinators today, she whispered. None of them ever met the anonymous donor, but 2 remembered receiving handwritten instructions asking them never to search for the sender. The wording matches the letters almost perfectly. Evelyn slowly nodded without taking her eyes off Marcus. Do not announce anything tonight, she replied softly. Not until we know the whole truth. Meanwhile, Nathan enthusiastically introduced guests to the new historical exhibit displaying photographs, early scholarship records, and copies of several anonymous letters with personal details removed. Visitors paused to read the words that had inspired the Foundation's earliest mission. Marcus happened to glance toward the display while waiting for Lily to finish speaking with her teacher. His calm expression changed almost imperceptibly the moment he recognized one of the reproduced letters. He lowered his eyes, gently placed a reassuring hand on Lily's shoulder, and quietly turned toward the exit. There was no panic in his face, only the quiet resolve of someone honoring an old promise. Evelyn saw him leaving before the opening presentation had even begun. Without drawing attention to herself, she followed at a respectful distance. Just outside the entrance, beneath the soft glow of the courtyard lights, she finally called his name. Marcus stopped, looked back with the same peaceful smile he had worn from the beginning, and waited. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn held up a carefully folded copy of one anonymous letter and asked in a voice filled more with hope than suspicion, Marcus, how is it that every step I take toward the person who changed my life somehow keeps leading me back to you? Marcus looked at the folded letter in Evelyn's hands, then toward the brightly lit ballroom, where guests continued celebrating without realizing that 2 lives were quietly standing at the edge of a long-forgotten promise. He smiled gently, not with relief or fear, but with the peaceful expression of someone who had carried the same burden for so many years that it had become part of who he was. You deserve an honest answer, he said softly. But before I give you one, I need you to understand something. If this conversation changes how you see me, then I have already failed. Evelyn slowly lowered the letter. Nothing could make me think less of the person who gave me a future. Marcus shook his head with quiet humility. I did not give you a future. I only helped keep one door open. You walked through it yourself. His words settled into the cool evening air. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Marcus reached into the worn leather portfolio he carried everywhere and removed the cream-colored envelope Lily had almost dropped several days earlier. He unfolded it with extraordinary care before handing it to Evelyn. Inside was the very first copy of the letter he had written more than 19 years earlier. The handwriting matched perfectly. The familiar closing sentence rested at the bottom of the page exactly as she remembered it. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears before she could finish reading. She searched Marcus's face, hoping he would somehow tell her she was mistaken, but he simply nodded once. It really was you, she whispered. Marcus looked toward the city skyline before answering. Not only me. Evelyn frowned gently. Marcus continued. When I was 19, I almost lost everything myself. My father had passed away, my mother was working 2 jobs, and I believed I would never finish trade school. An older carpenter I barely knew paid my final tuition without ever telling me his name. He left me one handwritten note. It said that if life ever became kind to me, I should quietly become that stranger for someone else. I searched for him for years, but I never found him. Eventually, I realized that finding him was not the point. Becoming like him was. Evelyn listened without interrupting. Marcus smiled faintly as memories returned. Years later, I read an article about a nursing student who was preparing to leave school because she had lost both of her parents. I recognized something in your determination, because I had once seen it in myself. I could not afford to change the whole world, but I could help one person stay on her path. So I wrote the first letter. Evelyn carefully wiped away a tear. You paid for every year. Marcus nodded. Little by little. Some years were easier than others. I repaired furniture at night. I accepted extra projects on weekends. After Lily was born, I almost stopped because raising her alone became difficult. Then I remembered the promise that had once been made to me. So I kept going. Evelyn looked at him with quiet disbelief. Why never tell me? Marcus answered without hesitation. Because gratitude should never become a debt. The moment you knew my name, you might have felt responsible for me instead of responsible for the people you would someday help. I wanted your kindness to belong to the future, not to me. At that moment, Grace quietly stepped into the courtyard after noticing the long conversation. She stopped several feet away, immediately understanding from Evelyn's tearful smile that the mystery had finally ended. Nathan also approached, carrying the program for the evening ceremony. Everyone is waiting, he said warmly. Evelyn, it is time for your remarks. Evelyn looked at Marcus with hopeful eyes. Please come inside with me. Marcus smiled kindly and shook his head. Tonight belongs to every student whose life has been changed. It should never become a celebration of one ordinary man. Before Evelyn could answer, Lily ran through the entrance carrying her painting with both hands. She looked from her father to Evelyn and innocently asked, Is everything all right? Evelyn knelt beside her and smiled through grateful tears. Everything is more than all right, sweetheart. Your father reminded me that the greatest gifts are often the ones that never ask to be remembered. The ballroom doors opened once again as Evelyn slowly walked back inside. But this time, every prepared remark resting on the podium suddenly felt far too small for what she had just learned. The audience welcomed her with warm applause, unaware that the greatest story in the room had never appeared on the printed program. Nathan Brooks smiled proudly from the front row while Grace Miller quietly watched Evelyn with hopeful eyes. Lily slipped her small hand into Marcus's, believing the evening was still about children's artwork, and Marcus was perfectly content to let her believe exactly that. Evelyn stood before the microphone for several silent moments before finally speaking. Tonight we celebrate generosity, education, and the belief that one act of kindness can change countless lives. For many years I believed that our foundation began with my determination. Tonight I learned that it truly began with the compassion of someone who never asked to be remembered. The room grew completely still. Evelyn looked toward Marcus, but instead of calling him to the stage, she honored the promise he had protected for so many years. Some gifts are so pure that revealing the giver would only make the gift smaller. Tonight, I will not break a promise that was never mine to break. Marcus lowered his eyes with quiet gratitude. He understood that Evelyn had just given him a gift every bit as meaningful as the one he had once given her. Nathan looked puzzled for a brief moment, but Grace gently touched his arm, silently asking him to trust Evelyn's judgment. The audience listened with complete attention as Evelyn continued. Beginning tonight, the Carter Health Foundation will create a permanent scholarship dedicated to anonymous kindness. Students who receive it will never be told the name of the original inspiration. Instead, they will be encouraged to help someone else when life gives them the opportunity. That is how hope continues to grow. The announcement was met with heartfelt applause, but Evelyn knew the real celebration was not happening on the stage. It was happening quietly near the back of the ballroom, where a humble father stood beside his daughter, smiling with the peaceful satisfaction of someone whose greatest accomplishment would never appear beside his name. After the ceremony ended, guests gathered around Evelyn to congratulate her on the new scholarship. Reporters asked who had inspired the decision, but she simply smiled and answered, "Someone who taught me that kindness does not need an audience." She never said another word. Outside, the cool Chicago night welcomed Marcus and Lily as they slowly walked toward the old pickup truck. Lily looked up at her father with thoughtful eyes. "Dad, why was Miss Evelyn crying?" Marcus smiled as he opened the passenger door for her. Sometimes people cry because they are sad. Sometimes they cry because they finally understand something beautiful. Lily considered his answer before climbing inside. Did we help her tonight? Marcus nodded gently. I think we reminded each other that people are stronger when they carry hope together. As he started the engine, Evelyn stepped outside carrying a small wooden box. She approached the truck before Marcus could drive away. I almost forgot this, she said, handing him the box. Inside rested the first anonymous letter he had written all those years ago, carefully preserved in archival paper. Marcus looked at it in surprise. It belongs to you, he said softly. Evelyn shook her head. It belonged to me until tonight. Now it belongs to the person who taught me why it was written. Marcus carefully closed the box and smiled. Then I will keep it safe until Lily is old enough to understand why promises matter. Lily leaned forward from the passenger seat. Can I read it one day? Marcus looked at his daughter with gentle pride. Yes, but only after you have already learned to live it. Evelyn felt tears return one final time, not from sorrow but from peace. She watched the truck disappear beneath the city lights, knowing she had finally found the answer she had searched for over half her life. Weeks later, the new scholarship welcomed its first class of students. Every acceptance letter ended with a single sentence that no longer belonged to one person, but to everyone willing to pass hope forward. It read, "Please allow this gift to remain anonymous, because hope grows best when it expects nothing in return." Years passed, and countless lives were quietly changed through that simple promise. Very few people ever knew where those words had come from. Marcus never spoke about them. Evelyn never revealed his name. Lily grew into a compassionate young woman who volunteered in schools, built little libraries with her father, and believed that the strongest people were the ones who lifted others without asking for applause. The greatest legacy was never the foundation, the scholarship, or the fortune that made them possible. It was one ordinary black single father who proved that a life measured by quiet kindness could echo through generations, changing hearts that would never even know his name.